In this class, we'll deepen our understanding of the pen tool and the spiral tool while having fun creating those beautiful flourishes and decorative shapes you see everywhere on the web, in wedding invitations, in magazines, and scrapbook layouts. When we finish, you'll not only have a fabulous collection of swirls and curves to use in your own work, but you'll have the method for creating all the swirls you can imagine. One of the key reasons the pen tool is so useful is that it gives you complete and precise control over your drawing and the power to edit your paths easily. So we'll start our drawing on a grid file I've provided to maximize our precision. Next, we'll reflect, scale, edit, and rotate the paths we create into beautiful designs. And finally, I'll show you how to place the decorative elements into two sample projects, a stationery set and a vinework border. This class is taught in Illustrator CS5, but virtually everything we learn is applicable to Illustrator CS4 and CS3 as well, and I'll point out any differences we encounter along the way. If you took my beginning Illustrator class on reneepearson.com, you have everything you need to begin. If you haven't taken my class, then you'll just need a basic or beginner understanding of Adobe Illustrator to get the most out of this class. The font I'm using to harmonize with the swirls is called Aphrodite Slim Text, and it's available on myfonts.com. But the font is not a necessity for this class. Swirl Shop is comprised of an hour of lessons you take at your own pace, and I'll meet you in Lesson 1. You should have the template file lcswirl_grid open. Choose the file for your particular version of Illustrator. The first thing we need to do is open Preferences and make a few adjustments. Go to the Illustrator menu on a Mac and pull down to Preferences. If you're on a PC, you can do this with the Edit menu, or if you're in version CS4 or CS5, you can just click the Preferences button on the control bar. For now, uncheck Scale, Strokes, and Effects. You can always turn this back on later, but we'll be doing a lot of scaling, and this will keep the point size of our lines consistent. And turn off double-click to isolate. We won't be using isolation mode in this class, and I don't want it popping up if I accidentally double-click on the artboard. Also, I like to have my keyboard increment set to 1/2 inch like I do here. Under Selection and Anchor Display, I have the middle two options selected. This just makes the points and handles a little easier to see. And in the same pane, let's bump up the snap to point tolerance to 5 pixels. We'll be doing a fair amount of joining paths in this class, and this will make snapping 2 points together a little easier. And check Show Handles when multiple anchors are selected. This way we can see all the curve handles with our white arrow selection, and it helps to illustrate the symmetry of the handles that produces well-proportioned curves. Now I'll go back up to Guides and Grid. And you can see I've already set the guides and grid setting for this file at 1 inch with 1/16 inch subdivisions, and this is the place you could set up a grid if you wanted to do that in the future. And now just hit OK. Now that we've got our preferences set, go to the View menu and select View, Snap to Point. Make sure it's checked. If for some reason you can't see the grid in your file, you would see Show Grid here. Just release to check it and reveal the grid. And here's Snap to Grid. We also need to turn this off and on throughout the class. It's very helpful when you need it and really annoying when you don't. So for now, make sure it's turned on, and I'll tell you when to turn it off later. Now, you don't always need to draw on a grid, but there are some benefits, and in order for me to be able to show you a consistent method, we'll be using this grid to keep our measurements precise. Okay, so let's get started. I've zoomed in on the upper left corner of my artboard, and I've moved my layers panel in just a little closer to make it easier to see here. The bottom layer in this file is called Tracing Guide, and this layer contains all the paths we'll be drawing. The anchor points are indicated in blue, and there are orange dots here to indicate the positioning of the curve handles. The little green arrow indicates the starting point when we're drawing curves. So we'll work on the layers above the Tracing Guide layer, so keep the Tracing Guide layer locked, and you can turn the visibility of this layer off when you want to see your drawing clearly. The two layers above are called Spirals and Curves. We'll be drawing all our component parts on these two layers, and then we'll bring them into another artboard to combine and arrange them into a design. And one more thing about the Layers panel. Go to the Options menu here in the corner and make sure Paste Remembers Layers is unchecked, like it is here. Since we'll be pasting elements between files, this will ensure you don't inadvertently add layers to the file you paste into, and your file will look the same as my demonstration in the upcoming lessons. So we'll start with a one-point stroke in black with no fill, and here in the stroke panel, make your end caps flush. So now our preferences and settings are complete. Meet me in the next lesson and we'll begin the drawing. To begin, select the spirals layer. We'll start our drawing on this layer. And we'll be focusing on this first path here. So get the spiral tool and then click on the artboard, and in the dialog box set the dimensions at 0.7 inches, 80% decay, 8 segments, and choose the first direction option. And throughout the grid here you'll see I've listed these options next to the spirals they correspond to just for quick reference. And then just hit OK. Now grab the spiral by the bottom anchor point and align it to the grid intersection, this blue anchor point here, and it just snaps into place. Now if you ever have trouble moving something because the bounding box is getting in the way, just deselect by clicking on the artboard with your black arrow, and then just click on the point you want and drag it into place. Next we'll draw the second spiral just clicking on the artboard, and change the radius to 0.45 inches, and everything in this spiral stays the same. And now we just need to rotate it. So double click on the rotate tool in the tool panel and type in 180 degrees and hit OK. Now grab that spiral by the top anchor point and align it to the grid intersection where the blue anchor point is here, and it just snaps into place. So now I have my two spirals. I'm going up to the layers panel now, and I'll just switch off the visibility of the tracing guide layer for a second here, and you can see they're both on the spiral layer. Okay, now we'll draw the line that connects the two spirals. So I'm going up to the layers panel and I'll select the curves layer, then grab the pen tool. The shortcut for the pen tool is P, and right here where this green arrow is, I'll just click with the pen to position the first point and drag to the right out to this orange dot. And notice, because we have snap to grid on, the handle stays perfectly flat to that grid line. If I move it around, the handle snap to other intersections on the grid. And if you weren't using snap to grid, you could hold down the shift key to constrain the angle of this curve handle. So drag it out to the orange dot, and this is 10 spaces to the right, and release. Now place the second point right over the top spiral point, and that's where the blue anchor is, and then just click and drag to the right, right over to that orange dot, and release. That's 10 spaces also. Okay, now deselect by clicking on the artboard with the arrow tool. You can toggle to the arrow by hitting Command on a Mac, Control on a PC, and I'll assume from here on out that you know how to toggle to the black arrow to deselect your pen tool paths. Next I'll go up to the Layers panel and lock the Curves layer. We're going to trim these spirals. So first select a spiral and then hit C for Cut. That's the shortcut for the scissors tool. And then position your cursor right over that anchor point on the spiral and click to make a cut. Then toggle to the arrow tool and select the extra line segment there and delete. And we'll do the same with the next one. So select, then click to cut, and select the extra path and delete. And this is why we're working on two layers here, so we can cut and edit these spirals separately without disturbing or accidentally selecting the curved path. Now go back up to the Layers panel and I'll unlock the Curves layer. And I want to join these three paths now so we have just one smooth curly path. If you're in CS5, you can now do multiple joins. So joins have improved a lot in CS5, and I'll show you the CS5 method first, and then I'll switch to CS4 and we'll take a look at joins in earlier versions of Illustrator because it's a little different there. So first, in CS5, all you have to do is select the three paths. I'm going to just marquee select them here with my black arrow, and then hit Command or Control J. And now all of these are joined into one path, and I'll just move it here so you can see that. And now undo to go back to where I was. And so for all versions of the program, the command for join is located under the Object menu. It's Object, Path, Join. And you can see here's the keyboard shortcut, Command J or Control J on a PC. So joins have become much easier in version CS5. You can join multiple sets of endpoints all into one path in just one command. And in earlier versions you have to do each set of endpoints individually. And so now I'll show you the method pre-CS5. Well, here we are in CS4, and now I'll show you the method for earlier versions of Illustrator. In CS3 and CS4, joins have to be done individually, and not only that, they're a little more finicky, and so I'll hide this tracing guide so you can see this. And we'll start with this join right here. We have these two separate line segments here, and we know these two endpoints are lined up perfectly because we drew them with snap to grid on. And I'll just move this spiral down with my down arrow key so you can see there are two separate segments. And now I'll just marquee select the two endpoints with the black arrow and hit Command or Control J to join them. And oh, there's a warning box, and it's telling me I can't join these two perfectly lined up points for some reason. Well, that reason is that I was using the black arrow, and really I should have been using the white arrow here, the direct selection tool. So switch to that. The shortcut is A, then marquee select the two endpoints again. Now hit Command or Control J, and yet another dialog box. And this one wants to know if I want a corner or a smooth point. And since this is a curve here, I definitely want to choose smooth point, and then hit OK, and it's joined. And I can just double check here by moving the point, and it looks good. So now I'll do the same over here. Just marquee select the two endpoints with the white arrow and hit Command or Control J, then choose the smooth point option and hit OK. And we have our single path here now. So remember this, CS3 and CS4 users, and you can always refer back to this part of the video if you need to review the method for joining paths. But from here on out, I'll be doing these in CS5, and I'll just remind you that you need to approach joining individually. Okay, so back to CS5, and here we are with the first swirl, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off the tracing guide so you can just see it unto itself, and I'll just marquee select the whole swirl with the white arrow, and you can see all the handles together now. They're very square, even, and symmetrical. And remember, we chose this option in preferences earlier to show handles when multiple anchors are selected, and that was under selection and anchor display. Without this, we wouldn't be seeing all these handles at once, and this just makes a nice illustration for us of how the symmetry of the curve handles generates this nice flowing line. Okay, so now we're going to work on the next flourish, and I'll just turn back on the tracing guide here, and then I'm going to reposition us here so we can see the one directly below. And I'll select the spiral layer, so we'll be drawing on that next. Now I'll grab the spiral tool and draw a spiral 1 inch with a 70% decay, and I'll explain what these numbers mean in the next lesson. And then 10 segments, the second direction option, and then hit OK. And then I'll switch to the black arrow, V is the shortcut, and grab this spiral by the right of center anchor point here, and then just drag it and snap it into place. Now we'll make a copy of this spiral and we'll snap it into place down here by this anchor point. It's the same spiral. So first I'll just select the spiral, and then I'll hold down my Option or Alt key on a PC and hover over the spiral, and you can see the double arrow lets me know that I'm about to copy, and when I'm hovering right over the anchor point that I want there, this little box beside my arrow cursor turns white. So I know I'm on target here, and I'll just click and drag all the way down to the corresponding point down here and release, just snapping it into place. Next, I want to draw the connecting curve with the pen tool. So I'll go up to my layers panel and lock the spiral layer, and then select the curves layer. Now grab the pen, go to the starting point here by the green arrow, and click and drag up to the orange dot. That's 13 squares up. Then go up to this top point, click and drag upward to the orange dot. It's 11 squares up. Release, and now deselect. And I'll do my cuts and joins just like before. First, go up to the layers panel and lock the curves layer, and now unlock the spiral layer so we can cut those spirals. And select that layer. Switch to the scissors by hitting C, then click to cut each spiral on that point right where it meets the curve, the blue point here. So click And now I'll cut the other one, click. And now toggle to the arrow tool to delete these extra segments, one at a time. Now, I'm going to join all three segments now, and this will be the CS5 way. First, I need to go up to the Layers panel and unlock the curve layer, and now I'm ready to join the three paths. So remember, in earlier versions, do this next step one join at a time and use the white arrow. But this is CS5, so I can just marquee select all three paths with the black arrow and hit Command or Control J, and they're joined. And I'm just going to replay this so you can see we've joined paths that were on two separate layers, and now the resulting path is on the uppermost layer of the two, the curves layer. So I'll test these out with a white arrow, and I won't test every join in the following lessons just to save a little time, but it's something you may want to do as you work. I found there can sometimes be a little trial and error involved with joins, and sometimes they look good, but then you realize the 2 points weren't quite lined up just right, and so Illustrator has inserted a line segment between the 2 points, and that's not always obvious, so it's good to test. So now we have two of our curly paths finished, and in the next lesson we'll take a quick look at the spiral tool in more detail, just to shed a little light on the measurements we've been typing into the dialog box. When you understand those things, you'll definitely gain some mastery over the spiral tool. So I'll see you in the next lesson. The spiral tool in Illustrator creates spirals based on three measurements: the radius, decay, and number of segments. And once you understand what these numbers mean, you'll get a lot more use out of this tool. So here I've drawn three spirals so we can make some comparisons. For each of these spirals, as you can see, I have the measurements listed up here at the top. Each spiral has a 1-inch radius, but the one on the right is so much bigger than the other two, so clearly the radius isn't the only number determining the overall size of the spiral. I'll turn on a layer here where I've drawn some 1-inch squares in green, and they're positioned right over the first segment of each spiral to highlight the radius measurement, 1 inch for each spiral. So imagine this curve here inside the square as a quarter of a circle, and I'll just turn on a layer here where I've drawn some circles to make it even more clear. So this is a 2-inch diameter circle with a 1-inch radius. And the same circle is implied here in the other two spirals as well. So this is what the radius measurement of the spiral is referring to. I'll just turn the circles off. The radius is the measurement of the first arc or first segment here, and you can see if I select it from anchor point to anchor point, the first segment of the spiral, just this arc here, has a 1-inch radius. So the radius measurement only refers to that first segment. The decay, the next measurement, is what acts on that radius to create the overall size of the spiral. You'll see the first spiral has an 80% decay, and so does the second spiral, but the third spiral has a decay of 90%, and that's what makes it larger overall. So here's how decay works. I'll go back to this 1-inch box here that corresponds to the radius measurement, and double-click on the Scale tool, and I'm going to reduce this square by 80% and hit Copy. And now I'll just position it over the second segment in this spiral, and you can see it fits perfectly within this box. The second segment is an arc that is 80% of the first segment. So each subsequent segment in this spiral is reduced or decayed by 80%. I'll scale the second box again by 80%, make a copy, and drag it into place. And there again, the next segment fits perfectly within. And this rate of decay continues all the way to the last segment here in the center. I'll turn on the circles once again so we can look at this. So decay is the number that's making this spiral turn inward here, becoming smaller than the circle implied by that 1-inch original radius. The first spiral decays at 80%, and so does the second, and you can see they're turning inward at the same rate. The spiral on the right, however, decays at 90%, so the second segment in this spiral is only 90% of the first segment. So this spiral turns inward less with each segment than the first two spirals. If I scale the 1-inch box here by 90% and make a copy, It fits right over the second segment here, and the next segment is 90% of the second segment, and so on. So you can imagine if we went up to 100% decay, the spiral wouldn't turn inward at all. It would just be a circle with a bunch of overlapping segments. So the last measurement of the three is the number of segments. And I'll just turn these other layers off so we can see this better. On the first spiral, there are 10 segments, and you can count from anchor point to anchor point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 segments here. The only difference between the first spiral and the spiral in the middle is that there are 20 segments on this spiral, and they just keep adding on here 10 more little segments here in the center. If I copy this spiral and make it a different color and align it just behind the first spiral, it's easy to see those extra segments are just spiraling into the center, and that's the only difference between the first two spirals. Finally, the spiral on the right. It has the same number of segments, 20, just like the spiral in the middle, but because it's decaying at a rate of 90%, it's moving inward at a slower rate than the other two spirals, and that accounts for this spiral's larger size overall. And it would need more than 20 segments for it to curl all the way into the center here. So that's basically the radius, decay, and number of segments. And you can play around with the numbers and try different combinations to see what works for you. I find decay rates of around 65 to 85% work the best for decorative spirals and for what we're doing in this class. And you can also control the radius, decay, and number of segments as you draw spirals freehand. The distance you drag determines the radius measurement. The Command key on a Mac or Control key on a PC controls the amount of decay. Hold down Command or Control and drag inward to increase the rate of decay, and drag outward to decrease the decay percentage. The up and down arrow keys add or subtract segments. And here I'm hitting the down arrow key as I'm drawing, just taking away one segment at a time. The up arrow key adds segments. And then hold down the space bar and you can move the spiral without letting go of it. Let go of the space bar and continue drawing. Now there's an important tip if you're using a Mac and a Wacom tablet. There seems to be a bug in Illustrator that makes the arrow keys behave erratically when you're using the pen tablet to draw with the shape tools or the spiral tool. So for spirals and other shapes you want to modify with the arrow keys, use the Wacom mouse instead of the pen, or use any other mouse, and you'll regain control of the arrow keys. And one last thing about drawing spirals on the fly. The measurements of that last spiral you drew persist in the dialog box. So if you drew one by hand that you like, just click the artboard again and you'll see the dialog box with the measurements of the spiral you just created. Now we know a little more about the spiral tool. So let's get back to our drawing. I'll see you in the next lesson. So here we are back in our grid file, picking up where we left off. And next we'll draw this comma shape here, and this will become the end cap for some of our scroll work. And you could also use it later as a stylized leaf shape too. I'm on the curves layer, and for the rest of our time on the grid here, we can just draw on one layer. We won't be cutting and joining paths as we draw like we were doing before. So first, with the pen, click the anchor point here at the top and drag to the left to the dot, that's 6 spaces over. Then go to the point below, click, and this time drag right until your handle reaches the dot on the right. That's also 6 spaces, and this creates kind of a semicircle here. Next, go to this bottom point and click with no drag, then click it again to make it a corner point. This is one of the important things to get the hang of with the pen tool. Clicking a point a second time converts it to a corner point. And next, close the shape by going up to the starting point again, and you see the O pop up. That lets you know it will close the shape. So just click and drag to the left, but watch your right handle until it reaches the circle on the right. Alright, and now we're going to just flip the fill and the stroke. So the shortcut for that is Shift X. And now it has a black fill and no stroke. Now we'll move down a bit to this long tendril here, and I'll flip my fill and stroke again, just doing it over here on the tool panel this time, so I'm ready to draw a line. And again, I'll just be working on one layer here, and this is something a little different than the swirls we drew before. I won't be joining the spiral and the curve after the fact. In this case, I'll start with a spiral and just draw a curved path by adding on to the spiral. So we can do that all on one layer. So first I'll create the spiral to these measurements. It's a 0.35 inch radius, 75% decay, and 7 segments, and choose the second style option. Now we want to rotate this spiral 90 degrees. Then grab it by the anchor point on the left and drag it until it snaps into place. And then now we're going to switch to the scissors tool and click to cut the spiral right on that anchor point you just placed, and then remove the extra segment. Now get the pen tool and hover right over that end point of the spiral and see the slash that appears next to the pen. That's letting you know we'll be adding on to this path. So now click and drag up to the orange dot. And then go up to the next point, click and drag up. And then click on the next point, click and drag up again. And you'll see the lower handle here is missing the mark here. That's something we're going to go back and adjust when we finish plotting the anchor points on this path. Then just go up and click here to place the last point. And now go back to this handle that we want to adjust and get the white arrow by hitting A. This is the tool for editing points and handles. And then select that point so we can see both handles here. And then just grab this lower handle and shorten it so it meets the dot. And see how the top end of the handle stays in place. We're just moving this one end of the handle and shortening it to soften the curve a bit. So that shows you something about editing these curve handles. You can shorten and lengthen them independently, but watch what happens when I rotate the angle. See, they work together then. So keep that in mind when you want to make adjustments to your curve handles. So we've been drawing these things in a formulaic way, but for your future work, when you're creating curves on your own, just notice how everything we've drawn so far utilizes these nice parallel and square curve handles, even this one down here generated by the spiral tool. We'll be working with some diagonal handles next, so things aren't always parallel, but I want to make sure you notice what we've been doing with the curve handles so far, which is just one approach to making nice curves, these nice parallels. Next, I'll move us down here below the artboard. We have a wavy line here to draw, and this path will become part of our vine work border later on. We're doing this one a little larger than we need it, but I want it to have these nice 3-inch to 1-inch proportions that we can take from the grid. And students in my beginning Illustrator class on reneepearson.com will remember this exercise because we did a few of these in the pen tool lessons in that class. Okay, so switch to the pen tool and just start by hovering over this first point. Then click and drag up and to the right. And since I have Snap to Grid turned on, the handles snap in at these grid intersections, but you could also hold down the Shift key to achieve this if you didn't have Snap to Grid on. Shift constrains the angle of the curve handles to 45-degree increments as you're moving them. So I'll click the next point, click, and drag down and to the right. And let me zoom out here a bit. And I'll move our view here a bit so we can see this. And I'll just keep clicking and dragging, just following the tracing guide. It's all clicking and dragging. And when I need to move, I just switch to the hand tool temporarily by holding down the space bar. And I'll back out here and we can take a look at this. So this is one secret for making balanced flowing waves like this. Position the curve handles in this symmetrical or mirror image fashion and keep the handles a uniform length. Also, the proportions that I mentioned before, the points here are 3 inches apart and the handles reach into the curves 1 inch at a 45-degree angle. So we have a nice pleasing 1:3 proportion happening here. Okay, now that we're through with this wave, rotate it by 90 degrees and then drag it up to the right side of the artboard so we can size it to this wave on the tracing layer. And I'm just using the bounding box handles to resize the wave to match the example here. And sometimes it's a little easier to draw a more exaggerated curve and then squeeze it into the proportion you want. And remember, we have scale, strokes, and effects turned off in preferences, so we maintain the line weight as we're scaling here. Okay, now we have a few more segments to draw, and first we'll make this leaf shape here next to the wave, and this will become a part of our linework border as well. Okay, first I need to go to the View menu and turn off Snap to Grid. And we're doing this because the anchor points on this path are not all positioned exactly at the grid intersections like they were before. So to begin, with the pen tool, click on the top point, then click the next point and drag down to the left to the orange dot. Now click on the bottom point and drag down and to the right, and then click on that same point again. We're creating a corner point here, and then click the next point and drag up and to the right, and then close the shape with one click on the starting point, and we have the leaf. And I'll just quickly hide the tracing guide layer here so we can see the shape now. Alright, so we'll turn that back on, and then we're going to move up a little here on the artboard and draw these two segments that will turn into a shape for a frame. And I have a little silhouette of it here in gray so you can visualize that. It's on the tracing layer. And once you've created these frames we're working on, you'll be able to use them in all kinds of projects. First, I'll go up to the View menu and turn my Snap to Grid back on here. And I'll start with my pen tool here at this point right beside the green arrow, and this one is just clicking and dragging all the way, pretty simple. And then I'll deselect before moving on to draw the next path, and this is just a couple more points. Okay, so we have the segments we need for one frame, and we'll assemble those later, but for now we're going to move up to this last one at the top of the artboard, and we'll work on the segments for this frame design here. Let me just slide over here to the semicircle, and we'll start with that. So we need to grab the ellipse tool, and we'll create a 1-inch diameter circle, and then I'll just grab it, move it into place, and it snaps into place here on the grid. And now to cut this in half, I'm going to show you an alternate method to the scissors tool for when you want to remove segments between anchor points. And we'll do this using the white arrow, so I'll switch. And this method is faster, but it does require you understand how points define segments. This circle is made up of 4 segments and 4 anchor points. If I try to delete these 2 segments on the right by clicking each one with the white arrow and hitting delete, like this, deselect, select, delete, you can see I'm left with a stray anchor point here on the right. And I'll just undo and back to the original circle. So to delete half the circle, these 2 segments and the point, just select the anchor point here, and then when I hit delete, the adjacent segments will be deleted too. To further illustrate, and I'll just undo, selecting 2 anchor points like this and deleting will leave a quarter circle. So play around with this and get the feel for how it works. For now though, select the point on the right with the white arrow and hit delete. Okay, now I'll move over a little bit here for this very last curve here. And for this one, I go up to the View menu and turn off Snap to Grid. This is another curve that doesn't conform exactly to the grid. And now I'll switch to the pen tool and start at this point here next to the green arrow. Every single point here is just a click and drag all the way. And now we've finished all the segments we're drawing in this file. So I'll just turn off the tracing layer one last time here so we can look at this last curve we just drew. And I'll select it with the white arrow so we can take a look at these curve handles. And we can see this one is not totally conforming to the square or parallel orientation of curve handles like we saw before, but it does have this set of curve handles here that follow the flow of the line, and also this nice rounded curve here with these handles that are like a tangent here, both of the same length. And you can see it really resembles over here this set of handles on the curve of this semicircle generated by the ellipse tool. So there is some logic to it. and it's good to take notice of that. So next we're going to gather up all these pieces that we've drawn here on the artboard, and we'll start assembling them into a design. So get these ready, and I'll meet you in the next lesson.